Welcome to the 2023 Day of Remembrance program from Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego. Before we begin, we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. The Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego acknowledges this legacy of balance and harmony, and we extend our gratitude and respect to the Indigenous peoples for their past and continued care and stewardship.
On February 19, 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the imprisonment of 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry into concentration camps. There was no due process of law. The Japanese Americans were labeled a threat to national security and stripped of their constitutional rights. Decades of deep anti-Japanese and anti-Asian prejudice had resulted in 600 anti-Asian laws. Agribusiness and other profiteers made huge sums of money by taking advantage of the mass incarceration. They could take only what they could carry. Jobs, farms, businesses, and education were shattered, many never to be restored. The Constitution and its vaunted guarantees became a worthless scrap of paper in the face of horse stall barracks, barbed wire, and armed guards.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2023 Day of Remembrance. Thank you for joining the Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego in this important community gathering. I'd like to acknowledge the 2-minute video you just saw. It is from Justice Now, Reparations Now, a film that was produced during the 1980s redress movement by Alan Kondo and the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, NCRR. On this Day of Remembrance, we remember the signing of Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. His action authorized the military to forcibly remove and incarcerate up to what we know now is 125,000 men, women, and children based solely on their ancestry. San Diego's Japanese American community was herded off to Poston, Arizona to be imprisoned during World War II, and my parents and relatives were among them. And after the war, they were fortunate to be able to return to San Diego, but sadly, our Japantown business district did not recover, with only a small number of businesses able to resume. And in all of California, there were only 3 Japantowns remaining: Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Francisco. Today, we proudly remember our first-generation Issei and second-generation Issei for suffering through the tremendous losses of homes, property, businesses, and not to forget, most importantly, the loss of their freedom, the loss of rights, and the loss of dignity. My name is Kei Ochi, and I am the president of the San Diego Japanese American Historical Society, and we're really proud to be here in remembrance with you. Remembrance really is a powerful act for each of us personally, pausing to reflect and honor our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents for what they went through with so much difficulty and suffering. And as a Sansei, I live with relative privileged life, and I know that it's built upon all of the hard work, sacrifices, and perseverance of my parents and all of the previous generations. And ultimately, remembrance brings us together as a community because, you know, the political and economic forces in 1942 did all that they could to get rid of the Japanese on the West Coast, to take the farms, ranches, businesses for their own gain. It was a racial diaspora, dispersing the economic power of hardworking Japanese Americans to all parts of the country. And as you'll be reminded today by our special guest and honoree, Dr. Peter Irons, there was absolutely no military necessity to remove and incarcerate all of the Japanese Americans from the West Coast. And as the professor stated in a recent presentation, the Japanese American incarceration was illegal. And as we Yonsei age gracefully, we hope, we look to our Yonsei and Gosei generations to remember with us, and so that they will in the future better understand and appreciate why we commemorate the Day of Remembrance, the impacts of EO 9066. And so I'm so pleased that Yonsei, Jaime Brown, will be with us also today, and she'll share her thoughts as a Yonsei and as an educator about DOR and our community. So indeed, remembrance has brought us together and connects us to one another. Our history, our ancestors, and I believe it makes our community stronger. A very important part of Day of Remembrance is maybe, I hope, to better understand and be reminded about what the Issei and Issei went through as a result of EO 9066. And although they are no longer with us, we are able to hear their voices, their stories from recordings of the 1981 Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. That's the CWRIC. If you recall, the CWRIC traveled to 10 different cities and interviewed over 750 former incarcerees, their allies, and a few naysayers did show up. These testifiers are truly our community's treasures. They have given us our history, our true history, and have made a recording for all of American history about what really happened during World War II. So now I'd like to show you a very short commission hearings clip.
My name is Martha Okamoto. I will try very hard, excuse me. My brother, in regards to my brother James, who was killed in Manzanar, I've never been able to talk about this. More people have come up to me and said I must speak up. My children, even my own children, don't know that my brother was shot in the back.
On December 7, 1941, we were the only Japanese-American family in Kodiak, Alaska. In a short time, my father and two uncles were arrested and put in concentration camps in the United States. We were not told where they were sent. They lost all their property, their house, their boats, equipment, and everything. I have never seen my father since. I have been trying to find him, been trying to locate him. And what happened to him, I don't know, and have been unsuccessful so far. I am very bitter about this. I have not seen my father since I was 11 years old. I am now 51 years old. I have missed my father very much, and I wonder. I wonder if he's alive today.
On a personal basis, I sincerely appreciate what you've done. But we're not talking on a personal basis right now. So you're trying to hurry me, and I will not be hurried by you as a representative of this government ever. Well, now you want me to leave You can tell me to leave.
No, I'm not telling. There's no point in getting.
Well, don't rush us.
No, I'm not trying to rush you. As a matter of fact, I think if
I've been rushed by this government enough.
Well, sir, I want to assure you.
If you didn't want this position, you volunteered for it.
Well,
So you know what some of these old men said? The old men say, hey, they feeding us because we're going to die. They're going to kill us. You know, just like the execution chamber before you die. Yeah, that's what he said. So, but that's why I thought, no, this country ain't going to do that kind of stuff, man. You know, it's a democratic country, Bill of Rights, constitutional, and all that. Just go with it, see? So they're not going to do it. This is democracy. You know what one woman say? No, this is not democracy. This is democracy, he said. He said, so by God, maybe this guy, he got a point, I said. No, he might be right. And then we get off the train. When we got off the train,
As a clinician in the field of mental health, I tried to understand why so many Americans, Japanese and otherwise, were able to justify, rationalize, and deny the injustice and the destructiveness of the whole event. I have come to the realization that we lulled ourselves into believing the propaganda of the 1940s so that we could maintain our idealized image of a benevolent, protective Uncle Sam. We were told that we were being put away for our own safety. We were told that this was a patriotic sacrifice necessary for national security. The pain, trauma, and stress of the incarceration experience was so overwhelming. We used the psychological defense mechanisms of repression, denial, and rationalization to keep us from facing the truth. The truth was that the government we trusted, the country we loved, the nation to which we had pledged loyalty, had betrayed us, had turned against us. Our natural human feelings of rage, fear, and helplessness were turned inward and buried.
No one benefits when truth is silent. The bigots and uninformed demagogues and persecutors will become increasingly suppressive and abusive, attempting to diminish our characters through crude jokes and half-truths. I will be proud to be a Japanese, and I would want to be equally proud to be an American. I do hope my late father's ideals and expectations for this country will someday be realized.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge those brave speakers on that clip who were Martha Okamoto, Iwan Yoshida, Jim Matsuoka, Charlie Hamasaki, Amy Mass, and Alice Nahira. On a personal note, Charlie Hamasaki is my uncle, and through the very, very emotional and tense hearings, his statement brought about some needed comic relief, but the subject matter was still very serious. And Jim Matsuoka, whose anger he pounded on the table, is something that most of us, thousands and thousands of people who have viewed this will remember, because his anger was one of the first times that I had seen, a Nikkei share their anger at this horrible injustice in front of a government commission. So they're very, very important to me and the community. And I invite you to see all of the testimonies from Los Angeles on vcmedia.org. Speak out. We're going to segue now to take time to remember our parents and grandparents who are no longer with us. Each year, we lose many of our family members and community friends, and the numbers keep getting smaller and smaller. And today we share just some of those community members who passed away in the past year. And to help with this in memoriam segment are Sam Alberts, our programs director, whom you met earlier, and Joyce Teague, who is currently an advisor to the JAHSSD, but served on the board for over 20 years. So now Joyce and Sam.
Grace Suida was a lifelong member of the Japanese Christian Church. of San Diego JCL, and the JAHSSD. Always friendly and kind, she was active in each group.
Miyoshi Ikeda. Miyoshi Ikeda was born in Hilo, Hawaii. He met the love of his life, Emiko Oda, when he was an Army Ranger at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was a teacher, professor, and school administrator. He and Emiko had 2 children.
Hatsue Aoto Mukai was born in Terminal Island and incarcerated with her family at the Post WRA Center. Longtime resident of Chula Vista, Spring Valley, and Gardena. She's survived by sons, grandchildren, and many nieces and nephews.
Moto Tsuneyoshi was born in San Diego and served the Buddhist temple for many years. He was always a memorable chairperson at special services, telling jokes to the Sangha.
Shinobu Yoshioka. Shinobu was a Concha Award recipient in the year 2000. She was a member of Pioneer Ocean View Church and served as a social services caseworker for Japanese American senior citizens.
Agnes Benson was well known in the Japanese American community, especially in the banking world. She was an executive at the Sumitomo Bank in San Diego and a dedicated temple member who is missed.
Toshiko Ogata. Toshiko was born in Kumamoto, Japan, and came to the U.S. in the 1960s. Before the war, her father was a Buddhist minister, and he was very active in temple activities.
Alice Asako Morinaka. Alice was born in Ovid, Colorado, and was an active member of the San Diego Buddhist Women's Association. She brought so much joy to others and donated beautiful orchids each year for the Hanamatsuri services.
Wade Watanabe. Wade grew up in San Diego and was an active and popular member of the Temple's youth group. And in his later years, he lived in Las Vegas, where he took fond care of his mother.
Kengo Yamamoto. Kengo was a well-known accountant in Bonita and part of the large Yamamoto family that farmed in the Chula Vista and South Bay area.
Harold Kuhn. JAHSSD Concha Award recipient in 2003. Harold was a member of the VFW Post 4851, docent on the USS Midway, and member of Pioneer Ocean View Church. He was famous for his rum cakes.
Norman Mineta. Incarcerated at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, he became a teacher, mayor of San Jose, U.S. Congressman, U.S. Secretary of Transportation, and was the chairman of the Japanese American National Museum's Board of Trustees.
Jim Matsuoka. At age 7, Jim was incarcerated at Manzanar, founding member of NCRR. He spent his life as an activist, educator, poet, and mentor to Sensei and Yonsei. His fighting spirit inspired all who knew him.
May we all pause for a moment of silence for our family and friends who have passed, and for everyone that you would like to remember today. Please join me in a moment of silence. 2023 marks the 40th anniversary of the historic 1983 Coram Nobis court cases and the decisions that overturned the wartime convictions of Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Minoru Yasui. In 1942, these 3 men refused to abide by the military's curfew and evacuation orders. They resisted, and for their resistance, they were ultimately convicted. Upon an appeal in 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld their convictions, uniting all 3 branches of the U.S. government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, in this very unconstitutional travesty of justice. These resistors lived with the onus of their convictions for decades, suffering much criticism for their actions from both within our own community and from without. And then almost 40 years later, in 1981, at the beginning of the redress movement, 2 young researchers met. One was looking for material to write a book about the FBI, and that was Peter Irons. The other, a Japanese American who was researching her family history. and who would later work for the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. And that was Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga. This auspicious meeting in the depths of the National Archives in Washington, D.C., changed the course of history. That is, Aiko and Professor Irons uncovered proof of the government's big lie of military necessity as the reason to incarcerate all Japanese on the West Coast and also from parts of Hawaii and Arizona. These documents uncovered proved that the US government and military officials during World War II had intentionally suppressed and altered crucial evidence. The findings were the actual smoking gun proof of the government's malfeasance and led the way to the reopening of the cases of the three men, Korematsu, Yasui, and Hirabayashi, who had been convicted of violating military wartime orders. Professor Irons was key in launching this historic Coram Nobis court case by convincing Fred Korematsu, who you see in the center of the photo, to participate and to file the lawsuit. And he also recruited a small army of young Nikkei attorneys to work with him. We'd like, with fingers crossed, show you a video clip from the film Alternative Facts, The Lies of EO 9066. It's a film produced by John Osaki. You'll see that Dr. Irons is interviewed in this film, as well as one of the attorneys who worked on the Korematsu case with him, and that would be Don Tamaki.
My stepfather got out of law school really in the depths of the Depression, clerked for a federal judge, and went into the Justice Department. And this was a time, of course, of the Roosevelt administration, and many of the very, very bright and able young people who went into the Justice Department were very much motivated by the ideals of the New Deal.
I was in my office on Sunday, December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and got all of the officials to come into the department that night, where I drafted the orders for the alien control unit of the department. When I first saw DeWitt early in December, I don't think it ever occurred to him that he would be allowed to give a military order which would say that all the states of California and Oregon and Washington were barred to American citizens of Japanese ancestry as well as aliens. He wanted the civilian authorities, the Department of Justice, to intern more Japanese aliens than we were interning. It was our view that really a minimum program was required.
The Attorney General and I and the Department of Justice believe there was no factual basis for moving against Americans of Japanese ancestry. This was very largely a movement by a lot of different people to use an opportunity to get the Japanese farmers off the West Coast.
Why did they want to get rid of them? Competition?
They got all their land. They've got thousands and thousands of the best farmland in California.
Edward Ennis was in charge of preparing the government's brief to the Supreme Court when the Korematsu case came before it.
Ennis is looking to confirm and incorporate the facts of DeWitt that Japanese Americans were engaging in espionage and sabotage. And so he begins to call up these reports, thinking that he's going to incorporate this evidence within the government's brief. And in searching for the evidence, he finds the opposite, that there is no evidence. Among the documents he found was the Office of Naval Intelligence report. They not only say that Japanese Americans pose no danger, but it actually recommends against this rounding up that happened. He writes to the Solicitor General of the United States, a guy by the name of Charles Fahey.
The Solicitor General is the nation's chief representative to the United States Supreme Court. The Solicitor General speaks not just for the President, but also for the Congress of the United States.
And Ennis says, it occurs to me that if we don't disclose the contents of the Navy report to the court, that we are engaging in the suppression of evidence. Ennis writes to the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, and basically says, what about these reports by DeWitt of illicit signaling by Japanese Americans? And J. Edgar Hoover writes back, we've investigated every single claim of short-of-ship radio transmissions, and we could find no evidence on which prosecution would lie.
Ennis got in touch with James Lawrence Fly, who was the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. He prepared reports which they sent to Ennis, which concluded that there was no substance to any charge that Japanese Americans had committed acts of espionage or sabotage.
We had that investigated by both the Federal Bureau of Investigation and by the Federal Communications Commission. And we got reports that there was no records, and their records were complete, of any such signaling.
Ennis enlists the help of a fellow Justice Department lawyer by the name of John Burling.
When the final draft of the government's brief to the Supreme Court in the Korematsu case was being prepared, John Burling decided to insert a footnote. It was a cautionary footnote that said, we are in possession of information that contradicts General DeWitt's final report, particularly as it involves the commission of acts of espionage and sabotage by Japanese Americans.
In this case, the stakes and the consequences were so high. By this time, almost 120,000 Americans had already been deprived of their freedom. They were imprisoned. The Supreme Court briefs are printed in booklets. The brief actually goes to the printing presses. John J. McCloy found out about the footnote. He contacted Solicitor General Charles Fahey, and Fahey ordered the printing presses stopped. The original footnote that John Burling drafted was deleted.
At the oral argument, the Solicitor General absolutely stood behind General DeWitt's report.
So this attempt to alert the Supreme Court that this roundup, this mass incarceration, really rested upon a foundation of intentional falsehoods failed. And that case stood for 40 years.
Thank you. I'm glad you got to see a part of that. And I'll just share again that it is from the film Alternative Facts, Lies About EO 9066 by John Osaki. And so we really know that he took a deep dive. John Osaki really went into the very, very important details of the cover-up. And it makes it a very, very powerful film. So I hope you were able to get some of that. And you saw Professor Irons speaking to the issues, and you also saw Nikkei attorney Don Tamaki, and who was part of the Coram Nobis team. For your work, Professor Irons, on our behalf and on behalf of justice, the Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego is so proud to honor you today. Dr. Peter Irons is Professor Emeritus of Political Science and History at University of California, San Diego. We really thank you for your dedication, your leadership, your tireless work in uncovering the evidence of the U.S. government's gross misconduct during World War II, which resulted in the mass incarceration of upwards of 125,000 persons of Japanese ancestry. A little bit more about you. Professor Irons is not only a longtime political activist and civil rights attorney, he's a highly recognized legal scholar, having written and edited 12 books on civil rights and the Supreme Court and constitutional litigation, among others. And I have heard many a time that the Korematsu case is taught in every law school to every new law student as just the epitome of what the government should not be doing and what the U.S. Supreme Court should not have done. And it really sets, I hope, new attorneys on the right path. In the interview of you, Professor Irons, in densho.org, you said, and I quote, "Lessons of history can be learned over and over again. So the extent to which people can learn about this and hopefully be able to exert their personal influence, both personally and collectively, to educate coming generations about this and use it as a lesson will be very helpful." That is exactly what our Day of Remembrance is about, Professor Irons, and so I thank you for that. I would like to just say that I believe you have done as much as any one person to right the wrongs of what happened to our community. And so it is my honor on behalf of the Japanese American Historical Society of San Diego to present you with an award, which you will receive.
Oh, wow.
And this award, I'm going to set it back down, states.
Don't drop it.
Pardon me. Oh yeah, no, I won't. Justice for All Award. And that reflects back to the photo that you saw at the very beginning of the program, a 1942 photo of Dorothea Lange, the famous photographer of the young schoolgirls in 1942 San Francisco, before they were forcibly removed. They were pledging allegiance to the flag. And I believe you all know that the last few words are, "and justice for all." If you see that photo again, their faces reflect the innocence, kind of the trust, and in some of the young girls, the loyalty they already felt to this country. So your award is named with that in mind. And we just want to now thank you and congratulate you upon this award and ask you if you have any thoughts that you wanted to share. And if you do or don't, I have some questions for you also.
Well, thank you so much, Kay, and thank all of you who are with us today. I know there have been some technical glitches, but which goes with life. But I'm delighted to accept this award, but I don't want to accept it just for myself. Most awards go to people who have accomplished something remarkable, but they could not have done so without the people who taught them who they were, what their values were, what kinds of things that they needed to do to make this a better world. And that's a process that goes on constantly, generation after generation. And the problem, of course, as Kay and all of us know, is that the longer things recede into the past, the harder it is for the present generation to connect, to see this is what happened and this is why it happened and this is how it's impacting us today. So what I would like to do, and there's a great deal written about and films about the actual cases themselves, but I want to talk about, since this is an award for me, how I came into this. And this to me is a story that is not unusual at all. I grew up, in fact, I was born in 1940, actually before Pearl Harbor. And I grew up all over the country. My father worked for the Atomic Energy Commission, and we lived in places where they were constructing atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, all over the country, Washington State, Delaware, Ohio, Massachusetts. But all that time, as I was growing up, going to elementary school, going to high school, I went to an excellent high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, going on to a very progressive college, Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where a lot of famous people, Coretta Scott King was a classmate, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's now the DC representative in Congress. It was a very active campus, both civil rights and anti-war. And we were protesting against the segregation in the South, and also the testing of atomic bombs, which could blow us all up. And so students then were beginning to see that they could make changes. They could do things, they could demonstrate, they could educate, they could protest. And I absorbed all of that because in my background, I was brought up to believe in equality for all, that every person is unique, and you can't lump people together simply on the basis of what color their skin is, or what church they go to, or how much money they have. Everybody deserves exactly the same rights. And Fred, of course, and Gordon and Min also believed that strongly, but the courts ruled against them. Now, what occurs to me is that this whole opening of the cases again was almost an accident. It was a total coincidence. As Kay said, I'd gone to the National Archives to work on a book about the FBI, but it turned out that book couldn't be done in the archives. It would have taken years and years and years. So without anything else to do in the archives, but wanting to spend time there, I went into their little library, picked up a book. It was Constitutional History, was just thumbing through it. And all of a sudden I recognized, wait a minute, there's Hirabayashi, there's Korematsu, the Supreme Court cases. And I remember back in my in my law school class on constitutional law at Harvard Law School, Professor Lawrence Tribe talked about the cases. We read the excerpts and we all agreed. And this is terrible. The Supreme Court made a very bad decision. How could they have done that? And that was what prompted me to start working on this. How could these intelligent, progressive men on the Supreme Court have so deliberately ignored the constitutional command that every person is equal? And it doesn't matter what qualities or characteristics they have, that's equality. And the other part, due process. Everybody gets treated fairly. If you're charged with a crime, you get a hearing, you get witnesses, you get a judge, you get a jury, and they make the decision. In the case of the internment, nobody got to make any decisions. They were made for them. But what struck me was, once I sat down with Fred Korematsu and handed him the documents that I'd found in the National Archives, what we call the smoking gun documents, as Edward Ennis says. It is highly unfair to this racial minority that these lies put out in an official publication go uncorrected. And he was urging Solicitor General Fahey to tell the Supreme Court there is no evidence that they constituted as a group a danger, and treating them as a group is a racist act. Well, it would have been impossible for me as a single historian lawyer to do any of this myself. And so I met Aiko in the National Archives. We agreed to work together to share the work we were doing, what we found. She worked on General DeWitt's report. I worked on the Justice Department files. And we had put together what I thought was a compelling case that the government had deliberately engaged in governmental misconduct before the Supreme Court. But what to do about that? Well, the last hearing of the commission in Cambridge, Massachusetts in December of 1981, I testified, and I had a statement, about 10-page statement, putting together all of the material that I collected. And the only Japanese American member of the commission, Judge Muratani, from Philadelphia, looked at this and looked over and looked at me and said, "This sounds like a Coram Nobis case." And I had known about Coram Nobis, although hardly any lawyers did. And that gave me the encouragement, well, let's go ahead. And so I contacted and eventually got in contact with all the lawyers who worked on the cases: Dale Manami, Don Tamaki, Lori Banai, Dennis Hayashi, Karen Kai, Bob Resky. There are the dozens of them. And I learned from them how to be a lawyer. That is, how to go into court, how to put things together, how to call witnesses. I'd never done any of that. I was a book lawyer. And so consequently, it was a collaboration between generations, between backgrounds, between races. And what I came out of it was that there is a new spirit, and we have to keep this spirit going. We may win these cases. We did win the cases, but that was just the beginning, because as Don Tamaki kept saying, our job is education. And we have to keep this story alive and present it to people who will understand what a terrible wrong was done. And so, without going into my 2-hour lecture about the cases, I do want to wind up by saying something very personal. 1982 or 1981 was the midpoint of my life to this point, 41 years before and 41 years after. And that second half of my life has been dramatically changed by my involvement, my continuing involvement in this educational project. And we have the reparations, and we have the redress, and we have the apology. But there are so many people, especially in our schools, who don't learn about this. Now, we have to keep one thing in mind, and I'm going to finish with this, is that there is a tremendous backlash going on right now, as we all know, against the teaching of real American history, particularly around slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, and the fight of African Americans and their allies, many of whom are Japanese American and other Asian Americans, to keep this educational project going. And our motto is never repeat history. So history fades into the background as we grow older, but there's a new history, and the history has to be taught. It has to be learned. It has to be experienced. And the way to experience it is to see people, talk to people who lived through this, many of whom have passed on, but still some around, and people who know about this. And so the real goal of this whole project was not so much Min and Gordon and Fred, as important as that was, because they were the ones who got convicted, but the entire Japanese American community, and reaching out to the people who don't know your history, don't know your past. And the last thing I want to say is, all of this time, I have been preaching against what I call the genetic theory of loyalty. You get your loyalty from your ancestors. But if your ancestors are hundreds of thousands of miles away in a country long ago, you become, in a way, their foot into the future. And the way to do that, of course, is to educate yourself and then educate others, and to keep this going. 10 years from now, who knows how many of us will be here, but hopefully this lesson will be taught over and over and over again until everybody. I never heard about the internment until I was in law school, and that's an indictment of American education. Well, we can't let that happen again. So again, so many thanks to all of you for the work you've all done and the work we did. And I'm just totally honored to accept the award in the name of all of us who worked on it. So thank you again.
Yes. If I would show my reaction on my screen, I hope it's all of us going. Do you see my little reaction?
Well, thank you so much.
Professor Irons, in such a short time, that was perfect. You so moved me. And I really, really appreciate, your sharing. And I know that in the chat, we have people also thanking you. So what we can do is get the chat downloaded and presented back to you too, because I think they like me are deeply moved by your words, and we really appreciate it. I actually, because we had talked previously, you've covered most of my questions, but I want to just pause again for a moment and ask the gods of technology and Sam Alberts if we can run the short video message of congratulations.
Peter, surprise, your old friends are here to participate in honoring you for such a well-deserved accolade for helping not just us and the Japanese American community, but help rewrite history. And the fact that you shared what you had was remarkable to me. You gave us a gift of being allowed to represent the interests of our parents, of our families, of the Japanese American community, and in a sense, the whole nation, to correct a terrific injustice and rewrite history. We felt that we were dealing with a brother, a family member, and it turned out that way, that we had become such good friends. My name is Dale Minami. I was one of the attorneys on the Coram Nobis Korematsu legal case, and as well as Hirabayashi and Yasui. And I was part of the team with Don and a number of other people. And it started in 1983. I got a call out of the blue from a man named Peter Irons. I didn't know him. I didn't know who he was, but he spun a very interesting tale about how he discovered this evidence that these cases, these landmark cases of Hirabayashi, Korematsu, and Yasui were the product of government misconduct and fraud. Wanted Japanese American attorneys to lead this effort. And that to me was remarkable because after having been treated with racism, discrimination in the courts by other lawyers, to have somebody like Peter Irons, a white male, come to us and offer us this case of a lifetime was really amazing. Also reflected his inner values, his politics, his sense of equality and fairness. And so I was impressed right away. And after Peter told me he would send me the doc, the first call I made was to Don Tamaki, who Don's first question was, are those guys still alive? This is 40 years later, and their names are just names in famous cases like Linda Brown. So we had a kind of a pre-made work team already. But we had to find other attorneys. And because the petitioners were Min Yasui in Portland and Gordon Hirabayashi in Seattle, I knew one Japanese American attorney in Portland. That was Peggy Nagai. And by coincidence, she was a civil rights attorney. And I knew Catherine Bonai, and it turned out she had already been contacted by Gordon Hirabayashi to help work on the case after Peter contacted Gordon. Catherine happened to be my former law clerk at the law firm I worked at, which is now Minami Tamaki, LLP. And so we were able to make connections pretty easily and bring Peter out to talk about our cases. And I think what I would add is the significance of these cases. And I asked Don to comment on this as well, is, Don understood the magnitude of what we were doing. We were going to retry history. We could have some ammunition to fight the opponents of redress.
Sure. Congratulations. I am delighted that you're being recognized. And for the audience here, my name is Don Tamaki. I'm senior counsel along with Dale Minami at Minami Tamaki LLP. That just means that we're the old timers of the firm. But it's really, I'm thrilled to be able to say a few words for Peter. For the audience, Peter's contribution to the redress and reparations effort and really rewriting this entire history is incalculable, really. I mean, until the cases that were reopened, the Korematsu case, although it was notorious as one of the worst cases in the US Supreme Court history, pretty much the universal thinking was it was a big mistake. And what Peter Irons, together with Aiko Yoshinaga Herzig, found is that this was no mistake. I mean, what started as perhaps wartime hysteria and sort of irrational fears that led to this really culminated at the highest echelons of our legal system before the Attorney General, the Solicitor General, the Justice Department, as a calculated plan to manipulate the outcome of these cases, even if it meant lying to the US Supreme Court. So it's not an exaggeration to say it was a scandal of epic proportions with our own families and our community as victims. And had Peter and Aiko not found that, I mean, this would have never been uncovered. These documents were lost in the Commerce Department, being misfiled and forgotten for 37 years. And so Peter, when he found these documents, he immediately understood the meaning of what they meant. And certainly it meant that we could rewrite our own history. Win or lose on the case, we would make sure the public was educated as to what happened, because it represented a collapse of the entire democratic system, where the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch each failed because, you know, in a word, racism shouted louder than the Constitution, and conspiracy theories and fake news really, you know, ruled the day, to the point that it tainted the entire judicial process and even motivated Justice Department lawyers, who really should have known better, of course, to lie, suppress, and destroy evidence before the US Supreme Court. So Peter's contribution is incredible. I would also say that, you know, I think we're among the very few Japanese Americans that Peter had ever met. I think Aiko Yoshinaga Herzig was the first Japanese American he had known. And so, you know, it was kind of a cultural exchange. We took him to dinner at a Japanese American, you know, at a Japanese restaurant. Peter looked at the wasabi. I think he thought it was ice cream or something, and he just popped it in his mouth. And we were going, you know, but he was a good sport about it. He understood, as Dale was saying, the importance of having Japanese Americans lead this fight, and that's a rare thing. You know, a lot of people would have wanted to take up this case and really cut Japanese Americans out of this story. So anyway, Peter, really want to thank you, congratulate you. I'm so happy you're being recognized.
Well, thank you, Don. Thank you, Dale.
I'm trying to find my reaction key again to applaud. Dr. Irons, I can feel the respect and admiration they have for you. It's just palpable. And for all the things that they said, of course, you really helped them get an incredible start in their careers. They were young, you know, Japanese American attorneys, and were not treated well by the community. And of course, the court case changed a lot of that. And to represent, or just an idea of their admiration of you, I emailed them, let's say a couple of weeks ago, and they're both super busy attorneys at one of the most preeminent law firms in the country. This law firm and each of them respectively have earned so many honors and awards. I mean, it's amazing. And so, you know, it was with some trepidation that I emailed them to make this recording. And my head spun within minutes. I heard back from both of them. It was unbelievable. I don't hear back from my family members that quickly. I mean, it just was boom. And they were there for you. And they said, what can we do? And it just spoke to how they feel about you, and also their appreciation for all that you've done for them and our community. So I want, again, to thank you. The time, you know, time is short. So We will get together after this event. I'll be in touch with you to present you with the award and share other people's comments with you too. So on behalf of the Historical Society and the entire community, I know, we thank you, Dr. Irons. We are so grateful to have you as a friend, an ally, and your award says a fighter for justice. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's the best, that's the best name anybody could give me, a fighter. And it's a long fight. It's never over. It started centuries ago and it's still going on. But one thing I wanted to say is that from the very first minute that I met Dale and Don and Lori and the others, I realized that I was part of them. They were part of me. We were all a team. It wasn't like I came in and said, well, I've got all this great stuff. Now, kids, you go off and do what you want in court. Everybody learned from everybody else. And we are still together. You know, almost all of us are still, we're getting a little bit, you know, a little bit grayer, but we're all still full of that zeal for justice that Fred had, that Gordon had, that Min had, and that so many other people have had to keep it going. And I think that if I hadn't had my experiences in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement before that, and seeing what can be done when communities come together, particularly coalitions of communities. And that was what struck me the most, that this was real community effort.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you again. And your lessons, you know, certainly will be remembered. They will, and they are being taught, they will be taught. And I'd like to segue then to introduce Jaime Yumiko Brown. Jaime is a fourth-generation Japanese American whose past and current relatives include several teachers, and not only here in the US, but in Europe and Asia. And in the year 2000, she graduated from UC Berkeley. She had honors in English literature, and then she went on to earn her teaching credential at San Diego State. After she got her credential, she joined her former teachers as a colleague in her alma mater, San Diego High School. She has since received her MA in Teaching and Learning Sciences at the University of San Diego. And over her 20-year career, Jaime has been recognized as a standout teacher by several local, state, and national organizations, including the Milken Family Foundation National Education Award in 2009 and California Teacher of the Year in 2018.
Wow.
But the acknowledgement she cherishes most are the thank you letters she received from her former students. She and her husband, Peter, share 4 children, 3 of whom are still in school. And she says that she will encourage them to follow their dreams as her parents did for her when she became independent. So welcome, Jaime, and thank you very, very much for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here to observe this Day of Remembrance with all of you. And being here and hearing from Professor Irons directly is really special. I find myself getting a little emotional about it.
I do too.
Okay, not just me, good. I'd like to speak briefly about my teaching experience with recognizing the importance of remembering the past and the hope that I have for the future. My grandfather, whom we called Ji-chan, was incarcerated at Poston, and my grandmother, or Ba-chan, was at Manzanar and later Tule Lake. And like many Japanese Americans who were in camps, Ji-chan and Ba-chan rarely spoke of their experience. I and my fellow grandkid cousins pulled stories from them for school assignments or heard a short anecdote here or there if they were feeling sentimental. Ji-chan had built a small add-on room behind his garage that we started calling the peanut room because he'd often hide out there to watch sports and eat peanuts. And this room also became a sort of repository for his camp years memorabilia. On the wall, there was a framed photo of him at age 17, standing outside the bachelor's barracks at Poston Camp 3. There was a helmet display that he wore while working in a mine. And sometimes after dinner, if I sat in the peanut room with him, he'd share a story about camp. But these moments were short and felt ephemeral. And I realized that some of the Issei and Nisei who lived through the incarceration had to find strength in silence. The resilience they manifested was fierce but quiet. And I draw upon that strength, but I seek to manifest it in a different way. I try to focus on using my voice and to teach my children and students that their voices matter. My teaching has been shaped by the experiences of my ancestors and the Japanese American community. There's a Japanese saying that seems very appropriate for today: Zenji no wasurezaru wa koji no shinari, which means not forgetting the past is the teacher for the future. And one of the senior courses I teach is focused on rhetoric and nonfiction. And for this course, I developed a unit called What It Means to Be an American that has proven to be a favorite among students. And I think they like it because the work we do during the unit is deeply personal. And it culminates in students presenting either a speech or a poem about what it means to them to be an American. And we analyze presidential speeches, patriotic songs, and the poetry of our first Indigenous poet laureate, Joy Harjo. And we also study Japanese American incarceration through 3 lenses: the documentary And Then They Came for Us, a speech given by Sansei Stanley Shikuma called Sansei on Being Japanese American in a Time of Crisis, and the music of Kishibashi, a Japanese American singer-songwriter. My students watch the documentary And Then They Came for Us and get to see the convictions of Korematsu, Hirabayashi, and Yasui overturned as a result of the work of today's honoree, Professor Irons, and the other brave and persevering people involved. The documentary and the Shikuma speech both make a clear link between the past and the present. They link the racism and xenophobia that led to the incarceration of Japanese Americans to the treatment of Muslim Americans, as well as to the jailing of refugee children fleeing from persecution in Mexico and South America. And these links help my students understand that we are all connected and that we need to speak up when we see injustices. And the documentary ends with the chant, "Stop repeating history, never again is now." The unit also focuses on the importance of rhetoric, diction, and the power of words. How did declaring Japanese American citizens non-aliens make it easier to treat them as non-citizens? How did calling the concentration camps internment centers make forcing US citizens from their homes and livelihoods more palatable? And on the flip side, how can we use language and our voices to speak up effectively when we see injustice? America and allegiance to America are increasingly presented as something that is absolutely clear and without nuance. But my students and I leaned into some of the ugliness of America, the things that some do not want us to talk about or even acknowledge. And my students get it. They see and experience the division in our country, the gray of what it means to be an American, and how the American ideals of freedom and equality aren't experienced by everyone in the same way. Many of them have already experienced racism, hate speech, and violence. Here are some excerpts from the speeches and poems they wrote at the end of our What It Means to Be an American unit. Ashlyn wrote, "What does it mean to be an American? Is it the apple pie on my breakfast table? Or is it the woman in the bakery who made my apple pie? Or is it the orchard where she gets the apples for my apple pie? Or is it the farmer who planted the trees that grew the apples for my apple pie? Or is it the millions of apple pies that are made each day by thousands of people who will never taste a single bite? Because in America, independence is a double-edged sword that you will continue cutting yourself on until you learn how to use it." My student Gnarly, who wrote about her experience with having both her father and stepfather deported by ICE during her senior year, concluded her poem with, "As they stopped my mom, a woman living here for 26 years who pays her taxes and has 2 kids, I'm scared my mom doesn't qualify to be American because I have no idea what it means to be an American. Are you American by having a certain piece of paper saying Certificate of Live Birth, State of California? That's the only difference I can tell between me and my mom. So after staring at my assignment, I answer, I have no idea what it means to be an American. My student Elijah, whose speech touched on the feeling of being an outsider. Today, being an American often feels like being on the outside looking in at other people enjoying core values like freedom, equality, and justice. It's difficult to have pride about being an American when both past and recent events have shown that I don't have the same protections and stability that others have. Just like any member of a team, you want your team to have your back. Being an American to me still feels like I'm a part of a losing team, but I still want America to win by truly living up to its core values. My student Ruben, who wrote, "Every day is a new day, a brand new sheet of paper. It's time to not repeat the past and change our future. It's time for all of us to be united and actually do something that our past Americans couldn't do. Make this the land of the free, the land of promise, the land of opportunity, the land of love and peace. That's what America should be." Naomi, whose speech focused on optimism for the future, she wrote, "America is a place of change and can be changed." And finally, William, who echoed my own beliefs in his speech when he said, "What it means to be an American is showing your strength and confidence. What it really means to be an American is our voice." There is power that comes from acknowledging the past and the current climate around our American identity. Ensuring the space to voice these personal concerns is the first step to creating change. We are growing the voices of the future. I have one more little anecdote and then something to share, and then I'll wrap up. So Obon is a Japanese folk festival where we dance to commemorate and remember our ancestors, and it's an important holiday for many Japanese Americans. And this past summer, my kids and I dressed up in our yukata and hapi and headed to the local Buddhist temple for Obon. When we arrived, my 14-year-old son opted to stay inside the Sangha Hall kitchen. He's hiding out. Sometimes he's just antisocial, so I didn't push him much to participate at first. And later he admitted that he was afraid. Afraid to dance? I asked, come on, everyone's dancing. Let's just do one together for Hiba-chan, Hiji-chan, and Aunt Jeannie. And he said, there are too many people here. There are too many Asians in one place. A racist will come and shoot us. And I was stunned because I wanted to say, don't be silly, that would never happen. But thinking of all the horrifying examples of violence against people of color that have dominated the media in recent years, I couldn't. And that was the first time in many years that my son didn't join the big circle of dancers for at least one dance. And since then, we've had family discussions about how we cannot live our lives in fear, that despite the harmful words and actions that we have experienced or observed, we owe it to our ancestors to live our best lives, proud of who we are and where we come from. And we will draw on that deep well of strength exhibited by those who came before us and who made our lives possible. And we will dance and use our voices. It's important to honor the sacrifices made by our Issei and Nisei forebears by not letting their stories go untold. I seek to do this in my classroom, but also within my family, and I see this same effort in the families of my Japanese American friends. And I'd like to bring my talk to a close by sharing a short video that I made with some of my friends. It features our children reading two short but poignant poems that were written by Japanese American children in camp.
The World by Jessica Hashina.
Who dares to say the world is filled with putrid smells of hell to come?
The world shall hate, shall crush, we live, we die,
and all is done.
The light of the world shall never cease to those with heart and love.
The life of love will give us peace at last when all is still.
Be like the cactus by Kimi Nagata.
Let not harsh tongues that wag in vain
discourage you.
In spite of pain, be like the cactus,
which through rain and storm and thunder can remain.
So on this day of remembrance, I believe that our future is bright. The legacy of the Issei and Nisei who came before us will not be forgotten. It lives within each of us. We will dance at Obon, we will live lives of love, we will use our voices, and we will be like the cactus. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo.
Oh, wow.
Wonderful, Jaime. Of course, your son's words made me cry, but you have uplifted me, and I'm sure our audience today. And you really do. Your teaching, I think you must be a fabulous mom. So thank you so much. It's, I think all of the young people who have you as a teacher are so fortunate. I wish I could be in your class because, you know, one by one, you are giving them voice, as you have stated. And that is, you know, a wonderful, powerful gift. Take personal privilege to thank your Bachan and Jichan, your mom and dad, Joyce and Bill Teague, and the family that supported you, because they've created and you have taken all those gifts that they've given you and you've become an amazing young woman. So thank you so much for being here today. I know that there are a lot of comments people will show their gratitude to in the chat. So yes, I'm so moved. But now, because we have gone a bit over time, it is unfortunately time to draw our program to a close. Again, I thank Peter Irons, and I know that we'll be getting together. You are our fighter for justice, and Jaime, teacher extraordinaire and human being amazing. I will personally reach out and thank Dale and Dawn for surprising Professor Irons. and I think it was a wonderful addition, and I'm grateful to them too. And I think we do have a few other acknowledgements. And I think the slide will probably come up, but I want to give credit to those who did the videos, meaning John Osaki for Alternative Facts, Visual Communications at NCRR for the commission hearing tapes that regrettably we couldn't see, and Justice Now, Reparations Now by Alan Kondo and NCRR. I do want to say that we do take the time to record, and then we edit, and then we put subtitles, captioning on the recording. And it does take some time, but within maybe a couple of weeks, we'll have it back on the JAHSSD website for everybody to view, and also on YouTube. It'll be made public so that the larger audience can see this program also. I'd like to thank all of you who have been patient in the audience, and Nancy and Julie for your assistance. And of course, to Sam, it is the technology person's worst nightmare. And don't worry, it's life, it happens. And, you know, I think that the voices we heard today, you know, Dr. Irons and Jaime, Dale and Dawn, others is really were the most powerful. And so I'll toss it back to you, Sam, for any closing comments.
Yes, thank you so much for your patience and for all of your contributions today, everybody that made this possible. I was moved many times. Still there. And I do want to make sure that everybody does know to visit our website for upcoming events, for more information, for research, to connect with us as a community. And as was mentioned in the chat, we will be sending out the links to all those videos because I know it was a little bit spotty today, so you'll be able to see them, the ones we used today and the ones you couldn't see. And when the video is available on YouTube for this whole program, edited to not show all of our all of the issues we had, we'll email you as well, so you can share that with family and friends. But we are going to be sending out an email with a survey about your experience today with the content and the speakers and all those links to the video so you can view them again. It will also pop up on your Zoom as soon as you exit. There'll be a survey that comes up. You can take it there, or you can use the link when we send it later. You can do one or both, whatever makes you, whatever works for your day. But we do appreciate your feedback and would really love to hear from you about how things were for you today and what you might like to see in the future. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday with us and being so gracious and giving so much of yourselves in this as well. It was really nice to be able to see some of your faces today too. And with that, I think we can say thank you and goodbye and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye to everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.